Welcome to the Father Focus podcast.
Father Focus.
Check.
Why are we talking about this? Why does it matter?
So shaping your kids into powerful people.
Bro, let that brother fly.
Check.
All right, let's go.
You ready?
All right, let's go. I was messing.
Well, hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another episode of Father Focus podcast. I'm really excited about this episode today. We have a special guest, a guy we've been following from a distance for a while. Connor Beaton in ManTalks is with us today. So, Connor, we want to welcome you to the show, man. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we kind of want to just kind of get a little picture of who you are, where you came from. Obviously, you're doing some really awesome stuff online. You freaking did a TED Talk. So obviously, you're doing some things pretty well in your life. But like, I'm always interested in the process of how you got from the beginning till now, right? Culture likes to highlight the mountaintop, but there's obviously a journey to get there.
Yeah.
So maybe even kind of give us some background on you personally, and then how you developed, your nonprofit and your organization and kind of everything that you do.
Yeah, I mean the short version, and you can kind of expand on any part that you want. The short version is, I was living a life that, on paper looked pretty good. I was traveling the world. I had the motorcycle and the sort of like toys, the sports car, 5-liter Mustang, which at the time I thought was a great idea. I'd probably go for a different car now, but I had a beautiful girlfriend. I was traveling the world. I had some of the trinkets that we as men will often go after that you sort of signal success. But behind the scenes, I was a disaster, and eventually all of the stuff kind of came crumbling down. I was dealing with a bunch of like addictive behaviors behind the scenes, some drugs, alcohol, a lot of women, a lot of infidelities outside of my relationship. And so, all of that came crumbling down. I questioned leaving the career that I was in, which I eventually did. And, it just led me on a very different path. One where I started to just connect with some of the men in my life and get a little bit more real about what was going on behind the scenes, what I had been struggling with. And when I did that, I started to hear from them some of the stuff that they had really been dealing with that I didn't know about, the broken marriages, the struggle as a father, the challenges in the business, the business on the edge of bankruptcy, the career that they just got fired from. And so it was very interesting because I started to realize that a lot of the men that I was surrounded by, we had a very surface level relationship, and there was just stuff that we didn't ever talk about. And that was exhausting. And I didn't feel like I really knew the guys that I was surrounded by. And it just led me on a different path where I found a mentor. I started to train in Jungian psychology and cognitive behavioral therapy, and then eventually Gestalt therapy and attachment psychology, attachment theory. And I started to, eventually I built the business that I have today. It looked very different when I started it. But I've been running it for a decade now, and I've worked with, tens of thousands of men all over the world, and we've put together some pretty epic programs. So maybe I'll just pause there and you guys can sort of do whatever you want.
Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in central Alberta in Canada, which is, I call it like the Texas of Canada, right? It's like lots of oil, lots of big trucks, lots of cowboys, lots of booze, lots of guns, except it's, it's minus 20, minus 30, like 5 months out of the year. So it's a little different in that regard.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So tell us a little bit for people that don't know about ManTalks. And at the end of the episode, I'll let you kind of plug whatever it is you're doing as far as your initiatives, but kind of give us a framework. ManTalks, like what's the mission? What are you trying to accomplish within your organization for guys that aren't familiar with what you do?
Yeah, I mean, our slogan is it's not therapy, it's training. And so, I think modern day therapy sometimes can let men down in the sense that it can be very female centric. It can focus a lot on your emotions and how you feel, and not really ever solve the problems that you've come in to try and address. And so we've really taken a tactical approach. There's parts of it that are very therapeutic, but there are parts of it that are really, about helping you create a plan in your life to be the father you want to be the husband you want to be, to build the business that you want to build. And by, doing that, by really tackling the obstacles that are standing in your way, the bullshit that you've been hiding, the sabotage mechanisms that you've been deploying for years, and understanding some of how you're at the epicenter of, you're the obstacle, right?
Yeah.
For lack of a better term. And so it's really all of ManTalks, whether it's, our online programs or our in-person retreats, it's about helping you as a man develop self-leadership, to develop an inner sense of authority where you can lead yourself more effectively, whether that's at home with your family, whether that is, in your relationship and your marriage, or whether that's at work or in the gym. It doesn't matter, but it's about developing the tools and the skill set and the mindset to actually have a deeper sense of self-leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great segue into kind of the first thing we want to talk about. So you did a TED Talk. It was obviously pretty successful. Watched it. All the emotions, right? Like motivation, excitement. In the end, you had the tearjerker moment. I'm trying not to cry while I'm listening to it in my car. So you kind of talk about the mask of masculinity, right? And you kind of reference it a little bit. There's all these layers to manhood. And I think society kind of teaches us to really hide who we are behind all this bravado and, all these masks and things. So I'd love for you to just kind of unpack that idea, because I think every man can relate to that. I think some of that's social, some of it's family. It's the way your dad was. I mean, especially a lot of guys that grew up with fathers that were in World War II, and, just that whole mentality that's kind of trickled down. So I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit, just kind of that concept and idea, because I thought it was so fascinating as you kind of shared that. And you should go check out the TED Talk, by the way, as well. So yeah, kind of explore that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, it's funny, like you do something. I think I recorded the TED Talk like 5-6 years ago, and it's managed to get me to have some pretty cool opportunities. I spoke at the UN. I've spoken at a bunch of different like Fortune 500 companies, and that's been pretty interesting. I never would have expected, large insurance companies hiring me to speak about masculinity when I first started.
That's
been interesting. But, I think that in many ways, we as men are socially conditioned to omit certain parts of who we are, whether that's sadness, whether that's any type of vulnerability. For some men, they might grow up in an environment where they have a single mom who villainizes their father and says, he's a angry, bitter man, and angry men are dangerous, and angry men are toxic, and angry men are unhealthy. And so that boy might grow up to be a man whose mask is, I'm not angry, right? So it can look a multitude of different ways depending on the socialization and the conditioning that a man experienced when he was growing up. But really what it is that we have to kind of check, what authentic part of me have I traded to try and belong or stay safe and secure growing up? And if you can start to get a grasp on what that is, for some men, it's, I never show any emotion, right? For other men, it's, I can never get angry. And so they have shitty boundaries in their relationship, and they get walked all over by women, and then they wonder why that's happening, right? So you have to start to look at, what elements of myself or my life am I not allowed to express? What parts of me do I have to hide from women? What parts of me do I have to hide from men? What parts of me do I feel like I have to display out in the world and sort of put on this facade that isn't truly me? I think there's some interesting research that has gone into stuff like imposter syndrome within the workplace. And they found that like 70 to 78% of people in leadership positions struggle with imposter syndrome. And a lot of that is a result of us being conditioned that we have to operate a certain way, specifically as men, that we have to operate a certain way in order to get respect, gain status, get women's attention, et cetera, whatever it is. not be a bad man, not be toxic, masculine, the list can kind of go on and on. So for every man, the mask is going to look different. And that's part of owning healthy, mature masculinity, is that you take a look at what's the facade that I'm putting out in the world. What rules am I abiding by that are keeping me stuck in life as a man, right? That it's not okay to cry under any condition, after you've just lost a parent or you've just gone through a divorce. And so you're holding in all of this emotion, which is causing you to be severely depressed or anxious or, drinking more or smoking more weed than you would normally do. So that's what the mask is. And that's how we can start to really sort of approach it, is you start to look at what parts of me do I have to hide? And then what am I trying to portray out in the world? And because maybe I'll say this one last piece, which is anytime that we have to put on a front, or anytime that we have to pretend that we're something that we're not, you're going to suffer. Right. This is why the whole pickup industry never really worked for guys. Right. You had all these pickup artists teaching men how to be someone that they weren't. And eventually that would collapse. Right. Eventually what would happen is this sort of kind of like geeky, insecure guy who didn't really know how to talk to women, who, was taught how to say very certain things in a very specific cadence and rhythm and, order. He could memorize those things and maybe get a girl to give him her number or go out on some dates or even sleep with him. But eventually they'd get in a relationship and the real version of who he is would start to come out and she would feel duped, right? Or he would feel like he had to hide who he really was. And in doing so, he felt like shit. And so that's like another version of the mask. And the truth is that the sexiest thing to women is you being unapologetically who you fucking are, period. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think not to push back, because I completely agree with you, but I guess at least on a basic level, the challenge is there's so many unhealthy men in culture that are wearing masks that it almost feels like to fit in a culture where men wear masks, you have to put on a mask, right? Like, I think that's a tension point. Even as an elementary school boy, I think there were certain cultural expectations of what it meant to be a man or a boy, and certain aspects and emotions you did not show. And, what do you say to men that are living in a culture where probably most men do wear masks? Like, how do you navigate that tension? Because you can feel it, right? You guys can say, yeah, that's really great, but I don't know how that would work in my life. Like, what do you tell guys that are kind of wrestling through that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's a normal part of masculine maturation, right? Like when you think about any, it's sort of a very adolescent way of embodying masculinity or being a man, right? Is you kind of go through this routine or this dance or this drama of trying to figure out what does it actually mean to be a man. And so it's not a bad thing to try on different masks, right? To see like, oh, does this feel more authentic to who I am, to sort of like be this macho dude, or does this feel more authentic to be who I am? And so there is a natural process that every man will have gone through trying to figure out who he is. And at some point we have to evolve beyond that, right? We have to kind of step outside this constant dance of like trying to be somebody that we're not and start to embody who we authentically are. And we do that by telling the truth. We do that by saying no to things that are genuinely just a no for us. You do that by saying yes to things that genuinely are a yes for you. And in doing some of these things, you start to teach other people who you actually are, and you start to inform your own psyche of who you actually are. And I know it sounds sort of basic and simple, right? Because all that I'm saying is like, tell the truth, and that will inform other people who you are. Well, there's a risk in telling the truth. There's a danger in telling the truth. It's why so many of us as men become very proficient at lying. I was a chronic liar for a long time, and it really helped me be this sort of like chameleon, but it really kept me alone because nobody really knew who I was, because I was constantly shape-shifting depending on who I was around. And that is that's brutal for a man, you know? But I think for a lot of guys, they know that when they start to be honest, when they stop lying by omission, which was my favorite one, just not telling the truth, just not saying the thing. That's kind of how I got through most relationships in my teens and 20s. When we start to speak the truth, there are certain consequences and risks that come along with that. But that's part of the maturation of stepping into a more mature version of yourself as a man, and stepping into a more mature version of your own masculinity, right? That there is this kind of assertiveness and directness and the quality and the capacity to take a risk that is intrinsically connected with masculinity, with being a man. And so I think that as you do that more and more and more, as you practice that more and more, you are going to develop that deeper sense of, this is who I am. This is what I'm capable of. This is what I want. This is direction that I want to go in life. This is what brings me meaning. This is what gives me purpose. These are the type of people I want to be with. And I think, unfortunately, in our culture today, so much of that has been outsourced externally through social media, that there's a lot of very lost young men who have lacked male role models, who have lacked men who are embodying what it looks like to be a solid man, or have embodied this very sort of wounded version of masculinity that we got post, World War I and World War II.
Right.
Yeah. Making a lot of great points. Oftentimes, maybe that what you're saying, men are uncomfortable with themselves. Like that's why they're not being fully themselves. What would you say to men who are out there? They hear what you're saying, and they agree, but how do men deal with? So once the man begins to live from his truest self, how do they deal with the changes that come with that? Like, the consequences are, what happened to you, Jermaine? What happened to you? You're different now. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm saying? This is all good, but now there is on the flip side, there is the fallout, if I can use that term, with, okay, now Nathan is living this way. What happened to you? How do they deal with the discomfort that comes with that from others? You know what I'm saying? And even in themselves, how do they process that? What would you say? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant question. It's a really wonderful question. I think it's the right question because look, our brains are pattern recognition machines, and they are designed to do predominantly one thing, which is to keep us safe. And so your brain will literally scan an environment or any circumstance and try and figure out what decision or choice you should make based on the criteria of keeping you safe, which means your brain is literally working against you changing.
Right. Yeah.
How ridiculous is that, right?
Yeah.
So your brain is saying, I know this old way sucks. You don't like your job. You don't like who you are. You have terrible sense of self-worth or self-confidence. Your inner dialogue is garbage and you're beating the shit out of yourself every single day. But at least you know that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's safe.
The other path of change, which requires confrontation. Okay. I was going to say that again. If you want to change, it requires confrontation. Period. You cannot create any type of psychological, emotional, physical change without some level of confrontation, having a hard conversation, getting your ass out of bed early in the morning, confronting the fact that you don't like yourself. I mean, I could just go down the laundry list. So it's inevitable that there's going to be some type of confrontation as you start to change. And people are going to recognize that. And really, I'm going to say a couple of things to directly answer your question. Number one, when people start to say those things, it's a sign that you're moving in the right direction.
That's a good point.
For the most part, it's a sign that you're moving in the right direction. Because what they're saying to you is, hey, something's shifting, something's changing within you. And they might not like it. It might be confronting to them, right? If you've been married for 10 years and you've been the nice guy who's never had any fucking boundaries, and all of a sudden you're saying, no, I don't want to watch The Bachelorette with you.
Right.
And your wife's pissed off about that.
Right, exactly.
It's right. Like there has to be, you have to take some risk in letting your life change around you as you change inside of you. Those two things have to happen. As you change internally, your environment and your life is going to change externally as well. And for me, you can work on either one, right? You can start to shift and change externally or internally. But one, aim for the confrontation, right? The confrontation is not a bad thing. It is what's going to help you change. Number two, learn your level of risk tolerance and push the boundary or the edge to the degree that you are capable of or comfortable with. Okay. What happens for a lot of men is they start to make some changes in their life and they think that they should be taking this like massive risk,
right?
When really they're not ready for that.
Right.
And their life can't sustain it, or their relationship can't sustain it, or they psychologically can't sustain it. And so they go to make this big decision, but it induces so much anxiety that it cripples them. And then they move back 5 steps. So really get clear and be honest and candid with yourself about what type of risk, what level of risk am I willing to take right now that would feel a little uncomfortable.
Yes.
Not how much, can I take this monstrous risk that's going to like destroy my life, right? So that's the second thing. Then I think the third thing is, I don't want to say this part. It's like trying to package it up, right? To just be concise for the guys that are out there. When people start to say that you've changed or that things are different, what I want you to remember is that your sense of authenticity comes with a price tag. There's a cost for your authenticity. And you have to decide whether or not you are willing to continue to live a life that you dislike, and that you're willing to live a life where you feel mediocre and you're not really satisfied with who you are or what you're doing or the quality of sex that you're having with your partner or the relationship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I would just go down the list. You have to decide, am I willing to face the fact that some people might not stick around as I step into who I know I'm capable of becoming? Yeah. Like, I lost friends along this journey because I stopped drinking. I stopped doing drugs. And guess what? Some of those fuckers are still out there going to nightclubs at 40 with 3 kids, drinking their face off, doing lines and and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I don't want them in my life. And so you're going to lose people along the way. And that's okay. That's a part of the process. Yeah, maybe I'll just end the rant there.
No, I mean, I think it's a fair point, and I think the thing that I would add, and we've all found this to be true, any men we've seen that have made drastic change in their lives first went through a period of isolation where, because of their changes, all their old friendships kind of left them, or they left those friends behind, but it actually ended up attracting the kind of men they wanted to become like after they actually started going through the process. So I think there's hope on the other side of it. It's just that in between that's so difficult for guys. And I know you talk about this a lot. I listen to your podcast pretty regularly about the importance of community, like finding like-minded men who you can walk through life with. And if you don't have that, it is a lot more difficult to sustain change because you'll always default back to what's safe, what's comfortable, what's known at the expense of actually the life you want. So that would be, an added piece that I think you insinuate over and over again is the men you surround yourself with is actually just as critical to the man you're becoming as anything else you do. Yeah. And it actually is kind of interesting. You mentioned this in one of your podcast episodes, and it was kind of staggering. We actually talked about it beforehand. We were like, we didn't know many people, but you said you found a study where 15% of men say they have no best friend or close friendship in their life. I'm sure you remember referencing this before. Kind of talk about that a little bit, because to me that's surprising, but obviously it's fairly common. Why do you think that is? What's going on in society that's causing a large percentage of men to have no close male relationships?
Oh boy. Okay. So there's a few things that play into this. I think it's really important. I'm going to try and just condense down the lanes that are feeding into this. One is, I think at a high level, if we go all the way up the stack or all the way up the chain, I think at the top is we have devalued masculinity in our culture, and that's damaging men. Just as a high level comment, I think largely, and I'm not going to point fingers or blame because I don't think there's value in that in this part of the conversation, but I think that we've devalued and dislodged masculinity specifically within men as a valuable trait. And so maybe another way of saying that is it's okay for women to embody masculine traits, but it's dangerous for men to embody masculine traits.
Yes.
And so for a lot of men, they have grown up being told, be a good boy, be a good man. You have to put a woman's needs and wants and desires above your own at all times. Otherwise you're toxic, you're unhealthy, et cetera. And so for a lot of guys, they've grown up in single parent households, largely single mother households, hearing how bad men are, hearing how toxic men are, hearing how dangerous men are. And then they go into, and this is next down the chain, there's an absence of male role models culturally, right? So 1 in 4 kids are going to grow up in a household without their biological father present. Yeah. And that's damaging, right? You just can't get around it. The data is so clear on this. And it's specifically damaging for young men because young boys, we receive the transmission of what it looks like to be a man from our fathers, from our stepdads, from our grandparents, from our uncles, right? We see how a man models masculinity, how a man treats women, how a man deals with his anger by observing the men that are in our life. And so there's a lot of young men that are growing up in fatherless households, going into school systems that are dominated by female teachers, coming out of that school system and going into college that's dominated by female professors, and largely college campuses are almost a 2-to-1 ratio of women to men. So college campuses have way more women than men. And then if you go to get help and you enter into the therapeutic system, again, 75, 80% of therapists and psychologists are female. And so there's just this vacancy that has started to emerge within masculinity, and it has deprioritized a man's ability, a young man's ability, a boy's ability to build relationship with other boys and other men. Wow. Because they just are not encouraged to do that. I think a lot of young men's spaces are being eradicated. And so the places where, you and I maybe grew up, largely getting to spend time with other boys and roughhouse and play, those spaces are being encroached on, and they're also being looked at as unhealthy. Right? Any type of rough and tumble play, or, the stuff that we as boys do to like jostle each other and use our bodies and be physical, that's seen as threatening, that's seen as toxic. And so it's discouraged on playgrounds and, in certain settings. And so I think a lot of these things are playing into a young man's life where he's being relegated to online spaces, and he's being relegated to, playing Roblox or whatever it is, Fortnite, Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, that kind of stuff. And so he's got all these virtual friends. And then even the friends that he has in his life, maybe they're friends, but they don't really know much about what's going on behind the scenes. They don't know about the shit that's going on in the relationship, or how, that guy's struggling with a porn addiction and he's been watching porn 2-3 times a day or for hours on end. And so all of this stuff that's going on in that young man's life, he doesn't bring into his friendships. So he might actually have men in his life, but he doesn't classify them as close friends, because they don't know about the depth of what he's dealing with. And I'll say one last thing, which is, I think there's a part of our masculine culture that is trying to evolve and shift right now. And that part is the part that says, you as a man, you are stronger as a man for figuring out your shit on your own, versus you are stronger as a man for going to another man and saying, hey, I'm struggling with something and I could use some help. What would you do in this situation? And so you have a ton of men, young men and old men alike, who have all these problem sets that they're dealing with in their life, and they refuse to go talk to other men about those issues because they are scared that they're going to get looked down on. Mm-hmm. They are going to get demoted down the hierarchy within male culture. And so they isolate. Like, the bigger the problem that they're experiencing, the more that they pull away from male friendships.
Wow.
So I would say that those are some of there's other things, but for time's sake, I'd say that those are some of the things that are feeding into it.
No, that's very insightful. I think we've heard that from some of our other guests too, have talked about kind of the female-centric world we live in right now. And, you know, kind of some of the commentary, like one of the things you referenced before is, I don't know if you saw James Cameron talked about toxic testosterone and some of that nonsense that he was talking about. And, you know, they're just, it feels like there's an agenda at play to suppress masculinity. The conspiracy theorist in us has our reasons why we think that is.
Right.
But we won't get into that. That'll be our other podcast about UFOs and all that stuff. But I know you wanted to jump in.
Round two, we'll get into that.
I've been listening and being educated. And I recently read a study by a guy by the name of Douglas Wilson, in one of his books. He's a pastor, theologian, educator, and he said, and he was just analyzing the education system, and he said, where a girl, a female, she'll be praised for what she does right, and if a boy, like naturally, so what a girl is going to do, you know, encourage her friends. She's going to write a letter, send it to them, encouraging, oh, you look pretty, blah, 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 whatever girls do. Encourage each other. And then he said, now we have a Christian guy who is encouraging another Christian guy, young teenager, high school. And the way he encouraged him is he found out that this one boy was kind of chasing after this girl and was doing some things he shouldn't have been doing. And the Christian guy, friend, walks down. He's the one who was the culprit here is at a locker, and there's a guy walking down to him, and he shoves him into the locker, and he looks at him and he says, "I know what you're doing," and he just kept walking. And he said, "Now I looked at that situation, and I'm like, that's a man." He's checking him. He's using like a certain sense of like masculine, like I'm encouraging you to do what is right, you know. And as pastors, it's like, hey, look, we're not promoting violence by all that, but there's something innate where it's like, I can smack my friends. Like sometimes that's what a guy needs. I don't need to like send a guy a little hidden note. Hey, buddy, you're so pretty today. Don't do. But, you know, a confrontational element to us. And I think that's obviously important. And I'm just wanted to throw that out there. Like, hey, look, we're not to act like girls. Like, I don't want to pick up my cues. I think you were saying this in the beginning. We're not picking up our cues from females. I don't want to be a female. I don't want boys to be a female. I don't want girls to be female. I don't want any kind of man to act like a female. If you heard it said like this, if you have any feminine traits, crucify it, get rid of it. But I think there's value in knowing who we are, the way God created us as image bearers of God, and learning from that place. And obviously, like you're saying, gathering in from friends, from mentors, role models to help us grow strong.
Yeah. All right. So we'll kind of wrap up this question. I was watching your interview with Chris Williamson, and you made a statement that I thought was so fascinating. I think we can kind of take this in two directions. We can take it in the negative sense of, man, we're in a really bad spot. Things are just getting worse for men. We're screwed. There's not a lot of hope. But I think there also is. But you said this is the first time in history where masculinity isn't being defined by men. So I could say that statement and we could feel really hopeless, like it's over. Masculinity is screwed. The generations in the future, there's going to be no distinguishment between boys and girls. Or we can look at that as a positive. So can we talk about that statement first from what you're observing? Because I thought that was really fascinating and very insightful. But then maybe let's wrap up this episode with some hope. Like, where's some good that we're actually seeing in the men's space? Like maybe even within your organization. Like, you know, there's a lot of guys that are just probably just feeling like, man, it sucks. Things aren't getting better.
It's getting worse.
Right. It's getting worse. So kind of talk to us about that statement, and then maybe wrap up with like a story or example or two of where we're seeing positive change in men.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the previous guy's name was. It was just telling the story.
Jeremy.
What was your name?
Jeremy.
Jeremy. I agree entirely. I think, we need accountability. Men need accountability. And we've strip mined male accountability out of our culture and called it bad. And so you have a lot of men who are left to their own devices. They don't have other men saying like, hey, brother, like, don't do that, or like, that's enough, don't speak to me that way, or don't treat her that way. And so there's just this lapse of male accountability. So I just wanted to say that, this is the first time in as far as I can see in history where masculinity is being defined largely by women. And I say that as a point to like wake men up, to say, look what's happening. Men are in decline. And we can see that in the data across the board. Less men are going to college than ever before. Less men are in the workforce than ever before, right? There's over 7 million eligible working men of working age between 24 and 55 who are not working, but they're eligible to work. You have less men in relationships than ever before. You have less men having sex than ever before. You have less men getting their driver's license than ever before. I mean, you just go down the list. You have more men who are taking their own lives, struggling with depression, anxiety. I mean, just et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I don't say that to make it sound bleak. I say those things to put men into confrontation with reality, right? The reality is that men are in decline and men are struggling. And that's the call, right? It's like, hey, wake up. People are struggling. Check in on your buddies. Check in on your friends. Have a more honest conversation. Get real with one another. Start to do some of the things that you should be doing, even if they're just super simple. I think this is why people like Jordan Peterson became so popular. He wasn't saying anything revolutionary. He was telling people to clean up their damn rooms and stand up straight. It's like simple stuff that your dad should have taught you. It's like super basic. And so, I say those things to bring men into confrontation with reality that there probably are parts of the men's lives who are listening to this that are not great, that they haven't been talking about, that they're avoiding and neglecting and not addressing. And so, when I say that, it's more of like, hey, stop letting society and culture and women dictate who you should be and who you want to be as a man. Stop it. Like, stop doing that. And start to reclaim who you actually want to be as a man. What values, what traits, what characteristics do you want to develop? What values, what traits, what characteristics do you care about that you want to invest time, effort, energy, and money into? What type of men do you want to surround yourself with? I think those are all the things that we need to move towards. But in a vacancy or in a culture that is devoid of masculinity, that is devaluing masculinity, and where there's an absence of male role models, what fills in is a lot of female voices saying, this is how men should operate. This is how you should be as a man, et cetera. And so that's the one piece. I think on the bright side, I think that there's a tidal wave of resources and conversations that are happening, just like this one, where guys are starting podcasts for fathers, for brothers, for sons. They're starting podcasts for men that are, wanting to develop a better level of attachment or whatever it is, So I think that there's this tidal wave of resources and support that's starting to grow and be built within the sort of collective consciousness of our culture. I remember a decade ago, when I started this, nothing like this existed. And I started my podcast 7 or 8 years ago, and it was one of the only ones, right? It's called the ManTalks podcast. And it was one of the only ones that was out there. And, so I think, but now you go online and there's thousands of podcasts specifically for men. And so that gives me hope, because I think a lot of men especially are looking for resources. They're looking for communities. They're doing the work to better themselves as fathers, as husbands, as leaders. And that's going to trickle down, like I have a 3-year-old son, and I think about the world that he's going to grow up in and how radically different that it is. But what gives me hope is that I personally am surrounded by hundreds and thousands of men who are there for their sons in a way that maybe our fathers weren't for us. And that lights me up. That makes me say, there's hope, in 20, 30 years time, this stuff that my son is going to know and the type of man that he's hopefully going to be is going to be far beyond what I ever had a chance at. And that for me is a bright future.
Absolutely, man. We share your hope for sure. I think we see brightness in the middle of a really challenging time, but I think it's actually causing men to wake up and realize we need to speak up, we need to stand up, we need to surround ourselves with other men, and we need to get a vision for what healthy masculinity is. I think we've seen the pendulum swing both ways, and we're like, neither of them are healthy. We actually need to find a good, healthy balance in the middle. So we love what you're doing, man.
Yeah,
we
thank you.
applaud and salute you,
Yes.
and thank you for all you're doing. It's helping a ton of guys. Did I see that you are having a second baby? Is that no, or just
I
the
am.
one? Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
thought I saw you post that. So congratulations for that, man. He's got 5,
you.
he's got 4, I got 2. So welcome to Multiples Club. It's real,
you-
man. It's fun too. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's a blast. Yeah, I have a son, 3-year-old son right now, and I have a daughter on the way, which
That's
is going to be
awesome,
awesome.
man. That's awesome. Get that shotgun ready, right? Well, hey,
Compound
before we let you
Compound
go,
bow.
yeah, what do you want to plug? Like, where should guys connect with you? I know you have a book. Like, what resources right now are you really excited about?
Yeah, I mean, check out the book, Men's Work. It's, every chapter has questions, exercises. It's meant for you to not just read, it's meant for you to do. So there's a ton of exercises and resources in there for guys that read it. And I've had tens and tens and tens of thousands of guys go through it and absolutely love the book. So check that out. You can find me at ManTalks on YouTube, on Instagram. I've got my own podcast. The big thing is we have live weekends where you can come out and do some pretty deep work with a group of like-minded men. And then soon I'm putting out a training program that's going to help coaches, therapists, counselors, and psychologists actually better work with men. Because I can't tell you how many men have come to work with me one-on-one or in a group or, at a weekend. And they're like, this 1 hour of working together has been more effective than 5 years of therapy. Like, what was going on? And so I'm
Right.
trying to shift the way that we coach men and the way that the therapeutic industry works with men, because I think they're
Wow.
leaving a lot on the table. So yeah, you can check out all those things.
Yeah, please do. We applaud everything you're doing. You inspire us. So keep up the great work.
Yes,
and
sir.
we really appreciate you being on the show. And for all the guys out there, please go check out ManTalks and what Connor's doing. We think it's phenomenal. Thank you guys for hanging out with us, and we will see you next time. Peace out. See you guys.